He stood in front of the whole class, just 12 years old, as the teacher mocked his intelligence. Not because he was wrong, but because he was black. The class laughed, the teacher smirked, and a boy who once dreamed of the stars fell silent that day. But silence isn't forever. Because years later, that same boy reappeared on TV, confident, powerful, and unapologetically black. And when the teacher saw him again, the regret came too late. In the faded squeaky chairs of room 209 at Briarwood Middle School, a boy named Malik Turner sat by the window, doodling galaxies in the margins of his science notebook. The classroom buzzed with soft whispers and the occasional cough, while fluorescent lights hummed above, like they too were tired of this place. Malik was 12, smart, curious, and full of imagination. His skin was the color of polished mahogany, and his hair curled in tight coils that framed his thoughtful face. But none of that mattered to Mr. Dunham, Mr. Roger. Dunham had taught at Briarwood for over 20 years. To the school board, he was dependable. To parents, he was polite. But to students like Malik, quiet, observant, black, he was something else entirely. His voice carried the edge of someone who believed in order above all, and respect as a one-way street. To him, Malik wasn't gifted. He was a disruption waiting to happen. That morning, Mr. Dunham called on Malik to solve an equation on the board. Malik stood, unsure. The formula hadn't been explained clearly. He asked, "Can you repeat the steps again, sir?" The classroom went silent. Mr. Dunham's face hardened. "Of course," he said with a smirk. "If you were actually listening instead of daydreaming like most kids from your background." A few students chuckled. Malik froze. Background. The word hit him like a slap. Not loud but sharp, not direct but deliberate. The silence in the room turned cold. Malik forced himself to walk to the board. His hands trembled as he held the marker. He got the answer wrong. Mr. Dunham sighed dramatically. "You see, class, this is what happens when effort isn't part of your culture." The laughter was louder this time. Malik sat down, cheeks burning. He stared at the notebook in front of him, but the stars he'd drawn now looked like lies. He didn't cry. Not then, not there. But something inside him dimmed. At home that evening, his mother, Latoya, found him unusually quiet. Malik usually told her everything. What he'd learned, the planets he wanted to discover, the inventions he'd imagined. But that night he barely touched his dinner. "How was school, baby?" she asked gently. He just shrugged. She noticed the scratch marks on his paper, the forced erasure marks. She didn't push. She wrapped her arms around him instead and whispered, "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You're made of stars, Malik." He nodded. But her words couldn't reach the wound Mr. Dunham had left behind. The humiliation didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Dunham kept Malik under a microscope. He corrected him sharply, mocked his handwriting, and once accused him of cheating when he scored higher than a favored student. He never said anything outright racist, but every jab, every comment, every sigh of disappointment when Malik raised his hand told the same story. You don't belong here. Not in this room, not in this world. By the end of the semester, Malik had stopped volunteering answers. He hid his drawings. He stayed quiet in group discussions. A light had gone out, and Mr. Dunham never noticed. Or maybe he did, and didn't care. One afternoon, as the school bell rang and kids filed out, Malik lingered behind. He approached the teacher's desk and asked if he could redo an assignment he'd been docked points on unfairly. Mr. Dunham didn't even look up. Why bother? Some kids just aren't cut out for this level of thinking. That was the day Malik knew. He wasn't the problem. The system was. But the story didn't end in that classroom. It was just beginning. Because what Mr. Dunham never expected, what he never even imagined, was that the same boy he belittled would rise, not just in defiance but in brilliance. Malik's path would take him far beyond Briarwood, far beyond the cracked chalkboards and cold stares. But that journey wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. It was stitched together with pain, perseverance, and an unrelenting need to prove that his mind was as vast as the galaxies he used to draw. He would go silent, but only for a while. Because when Malik finally spoke again, the whole world would hear him. After that humiliating semester, Malik Turner carried a quiet grief with him everywhere. Not the kind people noticed, but the kind that sat in his chest like wet cement. He finished middle school with average grades, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had learned that excelling only drew ridicule when it came from him. But his mother, LaToya, saw through it all. She wasn't highly educated, but she had something stronger: vision. She knew that the world wouldn't hand her son anything he didn't fight for. She made sure he stayed in books even when school made him hate them. She made him write about his day every evening, even if it was just one sentence. "You've got something to say, Malik," she'd tell him, "and one day the world will need to hear it." During high school, Malik kept his head down. He didn't join clubs. He avoided eye contact with teachers. And yet, something in him was still awake, still watching. He noticed patterns. He picked up on how black boys were disciplined more harshly, how their struggles were labeled behavioral instead of emotional, how teachers praised him when he recited facts, but never when he shared thoughts. He started writing again, this time privately. Essays, letters, poems, monologues. Not for class, but for himself. He wrote about Mr. Dunham, about shame, about being made to feel like an intruder in your own mind. He wrote as if someone might read it one day and understand. By junior year, something shifted. Malik's English teacher, Ms. Campos, saw what others hadn't. She read one of his essays, an optional assignment for extra credit, and called him after class. This was stunning, she said, placing the paper on his desk. "Have you ever submitted your work anywhere?" Malik shook his head. "Well," she said with a small smile, "you should. The world needs more voices like yours." Her words didn't erase Mr. Dunham's scars, but they gave Malik something he hadn't felt in years: possibility. He entered an essay contest hosted by a regional youth journalism organization. His piece was called "Invisible in the Front Row." It explored what it felt like to be present in a classroom but treated like furniture, noticed only when in the way. It wasn't angry, it was honest, poetic, raw. He won first place. The award came with a scholarship to a pre-college summer program in New York focused on media and communication. Malik was stunned. For the first time, his truth hadn't just been heard, it had been celebrated. At the summer program, surrounded by other brilliant and creative young minds, Malik found his people. He met kids who had faced the same things he had: racism, erasure, coded cruelty. He didn't have to translate his pain for them. They just got it. A mentor there, a retired journalist named Nathaniel Burke, saw something rare in him. He encouraged Malik to consider broadcast journalism. "You've got fire," he said, "but you've also got clarity. That's a rare mix." Malik had never thought about being on camera. But the seed was planted. College brought new life. He earned a full ride to a university known for its journalism program. He majored in media studies, but his true education came from the stories he told. He produced short documentaries on inequality in education, on racial bias in grading, on the criminalization of black youth in public schools. His senior thesis film, Chalk Lines, told the story of 3 black students from different cities who had faced classroom discrimination. One of them, a fictionalized account, was based heavily on his experience with Mr. Dunham. The film was selected for a national student showcase. That exposure led to an internship at a major news network. From there, everything took off. Malik Turner was no longer invisible. He became known for his fearless reporting, deeply researched, emotionally resonant, and unapologetically honest. His on-air segments on systemic racism in education gained millions of views. He didn't sensationalize, he humanized. His calm voice delivered hard truths, and people listened. At 27, Malik became the youngest primetime anchor on a major cable news channel. He wore tailored suits and spoke with a precision that could both soothe and shake. But more importantly, he never forgot where he came from. Every segment he wrote, every story he chose, it was all rooted in the boy who once sat frozen in room 209, too afraid to speak. One evening, while prepping for a special on implicit bias in schools, Malik's production assistant handed him a folder. "There's a guy you might want to feature. Veteran teacher in the suburbs, lots of controversy lately. Accusations of classroom discrimination from years ago. His name's Roger Dunham." Malik stared at the folder for a long moment. "I know him," he said quietly. He opened the file. Mr. Dunham was retiring. An exposé had recently surfaced about his repeated targeting of students of color. Accounts that had been buried by the administration over the years. Former students had finally spoken out. A quiet storm had formed around his legacy. Malik sat back in his chair. For a moment he let the memories return. The whiteboard, the heat in his ears, the shame in his chest, the laughter. He could have chosen to ignore it, to pass the story to someone else. But instead, he decided to do what he'd always done. Tell the truth. This time, on national television. The network buzzed with anticipation. Malik Turner was scheduled to deliver a deeply personal exposé during prime time, an unprecedented segment in which he would blend his investigative journalism with his own lived experience. The title? Silent Lessons: What the System Refuses to Teach. The production team didn't know the full extent of Malik's connection to the subject. They knew he was passionate about education reform and had long fought for racial equity in schools. But they didn't know that the man at the heart of tonight's story, Roger Dunham, had once dismantled his spirit in front of 30 classmates and walked away as if nothing had happened. As the countdown to broadcast began, Malik stood in the dressing room adjusting his tie. He stared at his reflection for a long moment. 27 now, national anchor. His face, once filled with questions and confusion, was calm, focused, steeled by truth. He wasn't doing this to destroy Mr. Dunham. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here to give a voice to every child who had sat in silence while their self-worth was stripped away by the very people trusted to nurture them. The camera blinked red. The segment began. Malik opened with data, undeniable numbers showing disproportionate discipline, lower expectations, and racially biased grading patterns in schools across the nation. He highlighted the systemic roots of the issue, giving context without condemnation. The tone was sober, precise, powerful. Then, halfway through the segment, he pivoted. "Tonight, I want to tell you a story," he said, eyes steady into the lens. "Not as a journalist, but as someone who once sat in a classroom where potential was dismissed the moment I walked through the door." The control room froze. No one had seen the final version of Malik's script, not even the producers. He had requested editorial control over this one segment, a personal exception, and now they understood why. "I was 12 when a teacher humiliated me in front of my peers, not because I disrupted class, not because I disrespected anyone, but because of the color of my skin and the assumptions he tied to it. He told me, in front of everyone, that kids from my background didn't belong in spaces like his, that we weren't built for this level of thinking. The air in the studio was thick with silence. His name was Roger Dunham. He's now retiring after decades in the classroom, but the legacy he leaves behind isn't just test scores or lesson plans. It's the quiet damage done to countless students like me who internalized the message that we were less intelligent, less capable, less deserving. The screen cut to short interviews with other former students of Dunham. One spoke of being penalized for speaking in African American vernacular English. Another recalled being accused of cheating when she outperformed expectations. None of these stories had reached the school board. All had been dismissed as misunderstandings or disciplinary issues. Malik's reporting was balanced, but it didn't flinch. He showed the pattern, the protection, the silence. He ended the segment with these words: "Educators have the power to build or to break. And when breaking becomes routine, we must ask, who gave them the hammer, and why was no one watching?" The response was immediate. The network's phone lines rang off the hook. Emails flooded in. Social media erupted. Silent lessons began trending nationwide. Parents, students, and teachers alike weighed in. Many thanked Malik for voicing what they'd experienced but had never dared say. Some educators felt exposed, but others applauded him, saying it was time for accountability. Former students of Roger Dunham came forward by the dozens, each one sharing a thread of the same dark fabric. But the most unexpected reaction came from Dunham himself. 3 days after the broadcast, a handwritten letter arrived at the studio. It was addressed to Malik. Inside was a short note, slanted, aging handwriting. It read, "Mr. Turner, I watched your segment. I recognize the truth in your words. I'm sorry. Not just for what I said to you, but for not seeing the harm I was causing to students who trusted me. I can't undo the damage, but I hope you'll accept this letter as a small attempt to acknowledge it. Roger Dunham." Malik read the letter twice, then folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't closure, but it was a crack in a wall that had once seemed immovable. In the weeks that followed, Malik received invitations from schools and universities across the country to speak about implicit bias and racial justice in education. He turned many of them down, carefully selecting only those committed to real reform, not publicity. He launched a foundation in his mother's name, the LaToya Turner Initiative, dedicated to supporting Black students in predominantly white school systems through mentorship, creative writing, and legal advocacy. His mother cried when she saw her name in bold letters on the banner at the launch event. "You've always seen me, Mom," Malik told her. "Now, I want to help others be seen too." Mr. Dunham disappeared from public view. No interviews, no statements, just retirement and quiet. But Malik didn't need him to be dragged or punished. The truth had been spoken. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, Malik visited Briarwood Middle School. The building looked the same. The paint was still peeling in the same places. But something had changed. A new principal, more diverse staff. A new mural painted across the hallway. Every voice matters. He walked past room 209. The door was closed. Empty. He stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. This time, it didn't hurt. It felt like peace. The world kept turning, but something in it had shifted. Malik Turner wasn't just a journalist anymore. He had become a symbol. Not the loud kind, not the viral sensation with trending dance clips and 30-second wisdom bites. He was something deeper. Quiet, strong, measured, A reminder that even when society writes off a child, the story doesn't end. It just begins underground, where the roots grow until they're strong enough to split concrete. After the Silent Lessons broadcast, Malik was offered a book deal. He resisted at first. He didn't want to turn pain into profit, but a mentor reminded him, "You're not selling your trauma, you're reclaiming it. You're offering others a bridge out of theirs." So, he wrote. The memoir, titled What They Thought Was Broken, became a bestseller. Page after page, Malik walked readers through his early life, through the shame he wore like a uniform, through the mental gymnastics required to be both brilliant and invisible. But the book wasn't just a reckoning, it was a map, a guide for students, for parents, for teachers who genuinely wanted to unlearn their biases and do better. The book tour took him from New York to LA, from high school auditoriums to Ivy League halls. Everywhere he went, people lined up, not to meet a celebrity, but to meet someone who had survived what many still lived through every day. One evening, after a reading in Atlanta, a woman in her late 30s stepped up to Malik's table. Her eyes were red. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched the book to her chest. "I'm an English teacher," she said, "and I was a Grace. I was the one who saw it happening and said nothing. I laughed when kids like you were mocked because I didn't want to be next." She wiped her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Malik placed a hand over hers. "We all had to survive something," he said. "But survival isn't the end. What we choose after, that's what defines us." A year later, the LaToya Turner Initiative had expanded to over 40 schools in 12 states. Malik hired a team of young black educators, social workers, and advocates to run programs designed for real change. Not just workshops, but long-term mentorships, student-led publications, and community-building events. Students who once sat silently like he did were now telling their own stories through art, essays, video diaries. In rooms where they were once ignored, they now roared. One particular program stood out. In a rural Pennsylvania school, a 7th-grade black student named Jordan had been placed on behavioral probation after defending himself against repeated racial bullying. Through the initiative's legal wing, his case was overturned, and the school was forced to revise its disciplinary policy. Jordan later wrote a speech titled, "I am not the threat you think I am." It went viral. Malik watched the video in his office, tears stinging his eyes. Jordan stood tall on that stage, just like Malik once dreamed of doing. That was it. Proof that healing wasn't just about one boy's victory. It was about creating space for thousands more. As for Mr. Dunham, he remained mostly out of the public eye. The district had issued no formal punishment. His retirement had been planned, and the complaints were too dated for administrative action. But the shame lingered. One gray fall afternoon, Malik received another letter. Handwritten, no return address. It read, "I saw your interview last night. You said something that stuck with me. Silence is not neutrality, it's participation. I was silent for too long, not just with you, but with others. I regret that silence every day. Thank you for telling the truth, even when it cut deep. It's made me look in the mirror. I hope more of us do." It wasn't signed, but Malik knew who had written it. He folded the letter, placed it next to the first one in the same drawer. Again, not closure, but another crack in the wall. Years passed. Malik aged into his role as not just a reporter, but a cultural elder. Still sharp, still passionate, but more reflective. He taught at universities. He mentored young journalists. And most importantly, he remained a student, forever curious, forever learning. At a journalism conference one year, he gave a keynote speech titled, "Stories That Save Us." He ended with a simple line, A child is not failing the system. The system is failing the child. Until we accept that, we'll keep losing what could have been our brightest stars. He left the stage to a standing ovation. Back in his childhood neighborhood, the school building that once made him feel invisible had been remodeled. Briarwood Middle was now Briarwood Academy for Social Justice and the Arts. A student newspaper hung in the hallway, and on its front page was a quote from Malik. "Your voice is not too loud, they're just too used to silence." Room 209 had been repainted. It now served as the school's creative writing lab. On one of the walls hung framed poems and essays written by students of color, many of them bearing themes of survival, identity, and pride. In one corner sat a mural of a young boy sitting at a desk, galaxy doodles blooming around his head. It didn't say Malik. It didn't have to. Everyone knew. Malik stood there one day during a surprise visit, staring at the mural. A teacher passed by and recognized him. "You gave them the courage to speak," she said. Malik smiled. "They always had the voice. I just helped remove the muzzle." She nodded, and after a pause added, "Would you like to say something to them? They'd be honored." He shook his head gently. "Let them write their own words. They don't need mine anymore." And with that, Malik walked out of the room that once stole his light, now burning brighter than ever before.